some backbench MPs are demanding the party, backbench Liberal MPs rather, are demanding that the party adopt a more open approach on the Voice to Parliament debate. Nationals MP Andrew Gee resigned last week after his party formally opposed the vote. Opposition leader Peter Dutton says his party will announce their position on the Voice next year. Well, joining me live now here in our Melbourne studio is Director of Hawker Britton and former Labor advisor Emma Webster. Emma, thanks so much for coming in and for your time.
Pleasure to be here.
Great to see you. What do you think is the big issue that Peter Dutton would be weighing up now? It's quite a conundrum for the coalition, particularly when you've got the Nationals taking such a strong stance as a party, but now we're seeing some Nationals MPs break away. There's clearly some tension there over this Voice.
Well, that's it. So the way I see it, Peter Dutton has two options. He can either back a binding vote or he can go down the avenue of a conscience vote. He's on the precipice of losing MPs if he doesn't take the second option. And I'll just take that opportunity as well to acknowledge the bravery of Andrew Gee and his conviction in coming forward and believing in what he stands for. There should definitely be more of that in politics.
We've certainly seen some big social moments in the federal parliament. We've even seen them in state parliaments as well, particularly here in Victoria. The same-sex marriage debate obviously saw all sorts of views and people being able to have conscience votes. Do you think this issue should have the same sort of approach from all MPs rather than going on party lines?
Yeah, look, I think it is probably the best path forward to offer up that freedom of vote. It's something people care very deeply about. But let me just say, it's also not a large ask from our First Nations people. They're simply asking for a voice and for us to listen. It's worth noting that here in Victoria, we have had an Indigenous voice for many years now. They're just about to hit their second electoral term, and that's through the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria. Look, the sky hasn't fallen in, farmers haven't lost their land, Indigenous artwork hasn't been taken off people's walls. In fact, we've seen some really meaningful change. We've seen a Stolen Generations redress scheme. We have seen the groundwork laid for treaty, and we have seen the establishment of the first truth-telling commission in the country in the Yuruk Justice Commission. So it's something that people shouldn't be scared of or something that people shouldn't overcomplicate.
Yeah, and you mentioned the commission there. The Yuruk Justice Commission's had its first hearings, public hearings over the last couple of weeks. No doubt, you know, that would be quite difficult for members of the First Nations community. So adding in this debate around the Voice to federal parliament, what's your advice to politicians in trying to remain sensitive and respectful of those in, you know, First Nations communities? You work quite extensively with them and you've got so much experience working in this field. How do people toe that respectable line on this issue?
I think if you always come back to the idea of doing the right thing and genuinely wanting to achieve reconciliation and genuine healing, it's worth noting that what we have done so far isn't working. When you look at all the measurements, when we compare Indigenous people to non-Indigenous people in terms of education, health outcomes, a range of different metrics, we see that our Indigenous people are falling behind. This is an opportunity to listen to Indigenous people because it's evident that the government and our parliamentarians don't have that same reach that a voice could have. And this is a huge opportunity to do that. And we know that when First Nations people are in control of their own destiny, when they use self-determination, there are better outcomes for Indigenous people.
Yeah, and we're expecting Anthony Albanese to give the Bob Hawke lecture tomorrow at the Woodford Folk Festival. That could be quite a marquee moment for this debate. It's quite a significant place where he visits most years and there's a lot of discussion around policy there at the Folk Festival. Do you think Anthony Albanese would need to come out strong on this, particularly on what we're seeing from the Nationals at the moment and seeing the splintering of the Nationals? Do you think Anthony Albanese needs to welcome people like Andrew Gee with open arms into this debate?
I think he needs to reassure Australians and remind them that it's not that complicated. It's simply a listening exercise, and I believe he said it before when he said it's good manners to listen. That's all that's being asked of here. you know, it's an opportunity to do the right thing, to right the wrongs of previous governments, and to ensure that everyone in Australia is heard.
And Emma, before I let you go, what do you make of the first year of the Albanese government? And do you think, you know, with the New South Wales election coming in a couple of months' time, there could be some challenges coming up at all for Labor?
Well, look, when I think of the New South Wales election, it's going to be the first time that Premier Perrottet will be facing an election. And if New South Wales was to go red, it would only leave Tasmania as a Liberal state. So it would sort of be Labor across the board. What that means for democracy, we'll have to wait and see. I think it's 7 months now of an Albanese government has been refreshing. We've seen a kinder approach to politics. And we've seen a leader who isn't afraid to let his ministers get on and do work, who has a softer approach, like a rhetoric that isn't fueled by hate and he doesn't brand himself as a bulldozer. So I look forward to seeing what happens for the rest of the term.
No doubt. Well, instead of being a bulldozer, he's out at the cricket today enjoying some well-needed time watching sport. I hope you get a bit of a break too. Emma, thank you so much for coming in today.
Pleasure.